I was born in Norwood, Massachusetts in May 1927. About when I was 10 years old, I thought my world had come to an end because my mother died very suddenly, and I was not great for, the next 6 months. I was in a fog. And then finally, about a year or so later, my father married. 2 years later, I guess, he married again. And then another year after that, we had a younger brother, which was great. We took care of him, my older brother and I. When I finished high school, at age 17, I was able to join the Navy myself. So I got to see a little bit of the world. The war was still on when I joined, but the war ended just after I finished my training. I ended up on a ship, the USS Alpine, and we went to Japan to bring a lot of military soldiers there. They're going to be the occupying force of Japan. And we landed in Nagoya, Japan. The trip over there was beautiful. When we came into the sight of Japan, we saw Mount Fujiyama in front of us. It was a beautiful country, but when we landed in Nagoya, the whole area was devastated by bombing. It was quite a lesson. It taught me at that point that nobody really wins a war. Every side loses, regardless of the outcome, it seems to me. I ended up my tour of the Army, and the Navy rather, and came home. I hadn't been the greatest student in high school. I fooled around a lot, so I went to prep school. I went to a school called Newman Prep. I played baseball on the team. I was there for 1 year, and I got my marks up and was able to get accepted at college. So then I went to Boston College. I became the sports editor of the student newspaper, and I was involved in the school debating society. And we had a dinner every year for the Fulton Debating Society, and our speaker, 2 of the years I was there, was Joseph Kennedy, who was the father of John Kennedy, who became president. And I was one of the 2 that was delegated to go in the limousine to pick him up, to bring him up to the college for the banquet that we had. And so in my discussions with him, I mentioned the fact that I'd be interested in working with his son, John, who was then a U.S. congressman. I got involved in the campaign. I worked with John Kennedy, as did a lot of other people. I mean, we're all involved. And at one point we had a big fundraiser, actually a mailing going out, and we had a lot of girls from colleges that we invited in to help stuff the envelopes and everything. And I was at a table telling this group of young women what to do, how to put the envelopes and the flyers in the envelopes and everything. And I looked up and I saw Jack Kennedy was up in the front of the room, and he was looking at me, So he went like this and walked down, and I said, oh my, he's going to give me some big piece of news, some important story, So he puts his hand on my shoulder and looks down, and he says, T, he called me T. T, he says, you never wear black shoes with brown pants. So that was the big, the big story I got. Toward the end of college, I decided that I would, I had met a guy in the Navy who was from Albany, New York, and we always talked about going to Alaska. So we did go up to Alaska. I bought an old car that I had for a couple of $100, and it took us 12 days to get up to the area. And I got involved with a group of veterans who bought the original old Army base in that area was Fort Seward, Alaska. And this group of veterans bought the Army base and renamed it Port Chilkoot. So we worked. I worked for them during the winter season. And I stayed a year and a half. And part of my reason for staying up in Alaska was to make enough money to go to law school. So I applied to Georgetown University Law School in Washington, D.C., and was accepted. I decided after law school that I would like to have some experience with the FBI. Always was interested in that organization, so I joined the FBI and was there in it for 12 years, a lot longer than I thought I would be. I was involved with a group of agents who recovered the Krupp diamond, which had been stolen, and we understood through an informant that the diamond was in play and was coming into the New York area. Actually, it came in through New Jersey, and we were able to cover the people getting off the plane. We had no idea who had the diamond, so we had to get assistance from our New York FBI office, and we followed every person, surveilled every person, every male person that came off the plane. Finally located the guy that had the diamond. He ended up at a motel in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and long involved story, but we eventually recovered the diamond, and in later years that diamond was purchased by Richard Burton, the movie actress, and gave it as a gift to his future wife, Elizabeth Taylor. The other big case I was involved in that got more attention than any other, I think, was the murder of the 3 civil rights workers, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were their names, down in Mississippi. We call that case the Myburn case, short for Mississippi Burning. And what happened was Mickey Schwerner was already in Philadelphia working for what they call the Council of Federated Organizations. This was a group that was there to try to help black people register to vote. Cheney was a Mississippian, a native Mississippian. He was a black boy. And then the third young man, Goodman, came from New York City. And the very day he arrived, Mickey Schwerner decided to take he and Cheney up to Neshoba County to show them a number of the churches that were burned. And while they were there, they were arrested by the deputy sheriff, Cecil Price, who accused them of being suspects in the burning of the church. So they were put in the local jail and held there until nightfall, and then they were released and told where their car was, and they ran to the car, got in the car, and got on the road back to Meridian, Mississippi, but the Klan was following them and couldn't catch them. Finally, the deputy sheriff pulled them over in the sheriff's car and turned them over to the Klan, and they were brought out into a big field and interrogated, and unfortunately Cheney, the young boy, broke and ran, and they shot him in the back and then just executed the other 2 and put them in, buried the bodies in an earthen dam that was being built in the area. And then eventually through investigation, we found out where the bodies were, and we decided to go in and dig up the bodies, go right to them and dig them up, creating the impression that we had word from an informant as to where the bodies were. And that was in some ways the case. That's one of the reasons we knew where they were. And we dug right to the bodies. It was a pretty gruesome task because they'd been in the dam. Their bodies have been in the dam now for almost 3.5 months. And the idea that they had been, that we had probably had a tip from an informant created a rift among the 12 or 13 Klansmen that were involved in this case. And they broke into 2 or 3 camps, each suspecting somebody in the other camp. And we were able to get 2 informants out of that. We did some very heavy, vigorous investigation and interrogations, and eventually made the case. They were acquitted in the state court, but we brought the suit in federal court, and they were convicted in federal court of violating the civil rights of the 3 young men that were murdered. So that case got a lot of attention, and was probably the most important case that I worked on in Mississippi, or in the FBI. While in Washington, I met the most important person in my life, my wife Faye, and we were, a twosome for a year or 2 while I was in law school, and then we got married while I was in the FBI. So we had two children while we were in the FBI, two boys, and then when we moved to Connecticut, we had two more sons, and that made up our family, four boys. Then was appointed to the Stamford City Planning Board. I served on the planning board for 7 years. Later I was involved in the campaign of another gentleman that ran for mayor, Fred Lenz. I was his campaign chairman, and when after that election he asked me to serve on the Stamford Fire Commission. I was chairman of the Fire Commission for 4 years. That was also a very great experience. I met some wonderful people. That kind of got me involved in the political life of the community. I'm still at the city volunteering. I'm chairman of the Old Town Hall Redevelopment Committee, a restoration committee I think is probably known as. And we're trying to restore the Old Town Hall building. I think people who get older, really need to think about their life and not think about retiring and going into a shell and doing nothing. You need to stay involved in something. You need to be active, be interested in what's going on. Being involved in the city activities and the campaign puts me in contact with a lot of younger people. I feel that I'm part of the group, I'm involved in it. Though I'm in my 80s now, I really feel that I'm, still lending some support and lending some value to the activities in the community. I love the town of Stamford, and I always will do some kind of work to help it and to benefit it if I can.